The Hangar Z Podcast welcomes Tony Lumpkin to the show.
And I mean, we're plus or minus 70 feet, like trying to like match up the hoist. You can get seasick just watching this happen. I'm looking at the left side, watching the waves, trying to time the wave sets in. I am getting airsick as hell. Like I'm just disoriented on the goggles. I'm trying to maintain heading. And next thing I know, I see the RMI compass just starting to swing. Like swing. I'm like, whoa, are we losing the instrument? No. They were so shallow that the tow cable from the IVIC to the Cullick had snagged on the bottom and swung this ship 90 degrees while we're over top of it.
On today's episode of the Hangar Z Podcast, Jack Schonely and guest host Bryan Smith are honored to have Tony Lumpkin, call sign Lumpy, for a compelling conversation. Tony brings a truly unique aviation background, having flown multiple airframes across military and civilian sectors. A graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy, Tony was commissioned into the U.S. Marine Corps, where he piloted the CH-46 and completed 3 tours in Iraq. He shares some of the incredible experiences and lessons learned from flying in the sandbox. He later transferred into the U.S. Coast Guard, where he piloted a Black Hawk conducting high-risk rescues. But his story doesn't end there. After his military service, Tony invited Bryan to join him on a one-of-a-kind flying assignment, piloting a helicopter off a luxury cruise ship in one of the most stunning and unforgiving places on Earth, Antarctica. A big thank you to Bryan Smith for leading this insightful conversation with his friend Lumpy. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the Hangar Z Podcast. We appreciate your support. Thank you to our sponsors, Summit Aviation, Robinson Helicopter Company, and Night Flight Concepts.
Welcome to the Hangar Z Podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts. The Hangar Z Podcast is the first and only podcast dedicated to promoting and exploring the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation.
Still southbound, skidding to a stop. Stand by here. Looks like you're getting ready to bail. Heads up, guys, bailing. Okay, the guy, he's running through the house, jumping the fence, through the shotgun, through something out. Grabbing the shotgun. Don't go over that fence. Don't go over that fence. Grab the shotgun again. He is armed. Stay there. Hold your position.
Welcome to the Hangar Z Podcast, brought to you by Vertical Helicasts and partnered with Vertical Valor Magazine. I'm your host, Jack Schonely, and this is going to be a very interesting conversation today. We've got a guest that Bryan Smith has brought us. And so Bryan with a Y, B-R-Y-A-N, Bryan with a Y, Smith, is going to join us today. Bryan, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me back, Jack.
Always this is great. John's on assignment, and he's actually, he's in some bunker someplace. No, he's actually celebrating Mrs. Z's birthday.
Wise choice.
Yeah. He is a smart guy. Unlike Bryan and I, John is very smart. And so he's spending some time with Shauna, which is great. So happy birthday, Mrs. Z. But Bryan is going to lead the conversation today. Bryan's been a co-host before here. You know, he's been a guest here. He is all about safety and a lot of experience. And those of you that follow the podcast, you know who Bryan is. And we get a lot of support. We get some cards and letters that don't want us to have Bryan on, but they're all from the same person, Bryan. Bryan, we get it from a Bryan with an I.
Oh, that guy. Well, if you go through life spelling your name wrong, it has psychological impact.
He's very sensitive to the Bryan with a Y, and his name might be Spillane. So anyway,
maybe
we've ignored those cards and letters from Spillane, and we're going to run with it. So without any further ado here, Bryan, why don't you introduce our guest?
Very good. Well, and before I get to that, Jack, I was instructed to only refer to you as the commander, and that I need to stand up when I do that. I'm not going to do that part.
No, don't do either part.
and a Benny Hill salute. I think that was part of the whole thing.
Commander of nothing. Continue.
Well, and to the other side, I got to tell you, one of my favorite people in the world. I'm really happy to have him here. It's so much fun to be able to spend time with both of you on the podcast because I idolize you both. So we have the commander on one side, and we have Tony Lumpkin on the other side. And this is going to be a great conversation. You know, there's certain people you talk to, and every time you talk to them, no matter how many awesome stories they've told you about their career in the past, there's a new one each time, to the point where you think he might be full of crap. But it's entertaining. Yeah, at least it's entertaining. So we'll keep that ball rolling. You know, Tony is one of those pilots that if you give a helicopter pilot a new one, a checklist, and say, how many things do you want to do with your career, and check the boxes, I think Tony has checked off almost every single one of those.
He sure has.
So we're going to go from flying tours in Iraq to, I have a note here that for a while you were a pirate in training.
Yes, absolutely. 6 months. Best years of my life.
Yeah. And then, you know, some civilian flying, some really interesting stuff there, back to the Coast Guard. And then at the end, Tony and I had the chance to do some flying together in some pretty amazing country. And we'll wrap it up with that. But, you know, through all that flying, also background with safety, training. It's just, there's so much to talk about. I'm really looking forward to it. And I think our listeners will get a lot out of it. So without further ado, Tony, Lumpy, welcome to the podcast. Glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me. And let's be clear up front that I'm only here because Bryan has dirt on me, and he promised to use it without me if I didn't show up. So,
wow,
I'm fine with clearing the air on that one.
Tony, how do you think we get 90% of our guests?
Why do you think I'm here?
It's all. We have dirt. They have dirt. You know. It's
yeah,
that's great. That makes for the best guests.
They make for the best stories too.
So, Tony, let's start out a thumbnail. You know, I've got a note down from Iraq to Antarctica. Give us a thumbnail, and then we'll go into detail. Where'd you start, and what were the major stops in your career up to where you are now?
Well, how much time do you have? I graduated the Naval Academy in 1997. I was commissioned a Marine officer, went to flight school, was assigned the CH-46 Sea Knight, or the Frog, as we love to call it. Ended up doing 3 tours in Iraq, and then got out in 2006, bought a sailboat, tried to be a pirate for 6 months down in Mexico, was highly successful, and almost sank my ship, but didn't. Finally got a real direction in my life. Married my wife, Cammie, then. We went to the Grand Canyon, where I flew tours in the Bell 206 Lone Ranger. Not a lot of money there, a lot of fun, but had to get up and get a better job. Ended up flying offshore oil out of San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara area in California in an S-76. Did that for 6 months, and then felt the call and got the opportunity to go back. Actually lateral transferred to the Coast Guard in 2007. Actually 2008 when I got commissioned. And then flew the H-60 for the Coast Guard in San Diego, then up to Kodiak, Alaska for 4 years. Ended up teaching at the Coast Guard Academy for 2 years, and then was finally retired when they finally kicked me out of the Coast Guard after 23 years here in Clearwater, Florida. They said you shouldn't fly helicopters anymore, so that's why I hadn't got another helicopter job. That's where I ended up going overseas and flying flight seeing tours in an EC-130 T2, also mega yacht, if you will. And that's kind of where I dragged Bryan into my shenanigans. Did that for almost 2 years, and finally saw the light, realized that's a single man's game, not so great for the family, and ended up going, finishing up my fixed wing ratings, and now I fly Part 121 for an airline.
It's amazing. What a...
Yeah. So what's next? I don't know.
Bryan, we could spend a couple hours on each of those.
Yeah. It's every 10-year-old kid's dream. What do you want to do when you grow up?
I just haven't figured out what I want to do when I grow up yet. That's the problem.
Well, growing up is detrimental to plans like that. You got to fend it off. Well, let's go back to the beginning.
Sure.
To little Lumpy. Where'd you grow up, and what got you interested in aviation?
I grew up an Army brat, the one branch of service that I didn't actually serve in, but did 18 years in the Army. My dad was a quartermaster, logistics. We bounced around the world, and we're always co-located, or usually co-located with Air Force bases. So I had an early love for the jets that were going on there and the aviation and being around that. And of course, Army aviation, tons of helicopters, especially in logistics, which my dad was involved with. So I got that bug really early. There's a classic 3-year-old Lumpy in his diaper holding an airplane in his hand picture that my mom loves to show me and remind me that I've always wanted to be a pilot from day one. But I also had a really big influence in my life. That's the picture I love back here, the B-24. My grandfather was a B-24 pilot, flew the hump of the Himalayas in World War II. And he and I were really close. And especially when I got into aviation training, we really had that bond since he and I are the only pilots in the family. So yeah, he had an early influence. I was always inspired by him. He didn't talk too much, as a lot of those veterans don't, but there was just enough of a hint there to tell me he did some pretty awesome stuff. And I always wanted to try and replicate that.
You had a great story where he got to see the local terrain up close a little bit more than he had planned.
Yeah, they were flying the hump, China, Burma, India. For those that aren't familiar, pretty treacherous stretch of terrain, pretty high altitudes, dead reckoning type navigation for, 10, 12 hours at a stretch through storms. And they just did that, back and forth every day, and he was a C-109 and a C-54 Skytrain pilot, so quad engine. And one day he was flying a fuel-laden C-109, and they got hit by lightning over the Himalayas somewhere. Engine caught on fire, and the crew's like, "We're out. This is a flying time bomb." So they bailed, and then he ended up having to bail out with his co-pilot over the jungles, which were full of headhunters and bounties put out by the Japanese for these pilots. And he was able to make his way out with an injured co-pilot, and his crew ended up on some rich hidden plantation, separate from the war, and had a great couple of weeks hanging out with some rich British folks. But he ended up hiking out with his co-pilot, and 8 days later, after being called missing in action, we still have the telegram, he showed up at work, and the next day he was on the flight schedule again. So, wow, what a generation.
Yeah, incredible.
Yeah.
Now, you have a second part to that story, but I'd like to go back to it after we talk a little bit more about you getting your start then. So you have that influence, and you want to be a pilot. How does your career get started?
One of the biggest pieces of wisdom that my Army father gave me was, if you want to be a pilot and an officer, don't go in the Army. So forgive me, all the Army aviators, I get it. Commissioned officers work really hard and they fly hard, and warrant officers are different. We'll just leave it at that. And so there was some impetus to go towards the Air Force. Obviously, with my being around the Air Force bases quite a bit, that's what I knew, Army and Air Force. So I applied to the Air Force Academy, and I got turned down because my buddies and my friend group in high school, I learned almost 30 years later, actually got the congressional nomination, and I didn't. But there was a nomination to the Naval Academy, which was completely unknown to me. But it happened to coincide with a lot of Top Gun movies at the time. Shows you our age. Iron Eagle was a good influence too. But Top Gun and the Blue and Gold officers that called me after I got the nomination convinced me that was the way to go. So I ended up going to the Naval Academy. And while there, had a really good couple of Marine Corps mentors. As most people know, the Marine Corps is part of the Navy, and the Naval Academy also produces Marine Corps officers as well. And so I did the Marine Corps training and the Marine Corps screening processes, and ended up getting a Marine Corps commission and a very limited and coveted aviation slot.
Awesome. So the aviation training, that starts out, you're still on a fixed wing track at that point, everybody, correct?
Yeah. So Navy, Marine Corps, Coast Guard, we started out on it was the T-34 Tormentor turboprop. They've moved up to the T-6, which is a beautiful airplane. But T-34 was great. We go to initial, do the officer and gentleman thing in Pensacola, survive that medical screening, do your ground school, then you go down to Corpus Christi, where you do your initial fixed wing training and your intermediate, and then you get selected based on grades, and as I found out, the needs of the Marine Corps. And as I may have alluded to earlier, I really wanted to be a jet guy. Absolutely my life's dream. And here I am, 24 at the time, and everything passed a lot of wickets to get to that point. I had the minimum score to be a jet guy. They did require a minimum score to do that. And then every 2 weeks, they kind of lump together whoever's finishing up after those 18 months. into graduate groups. And then the detailer says, this is what we got. And I said, we've got 1 jet slot, 1 C-130 slot, and 8 helicopter slots. And guess who was number 3 in the group? So, so I was number 3. And congratulations, Lumpy, you are now a helicopter pilot. And I was devastated, I'll be honest. I mean, I never saw that coming, never really gave that the possible thought. And I was moping around like a true 24-year-old. The day after, walking around the squadron, and a Marine Corps major was walking by and pulled me aside, and as a good Marine officer does, goes, "What's your problem, Marine?" So I told him, and he goes, "Come with me." And oh man, I thought I was in trouble. But he marched me over to the station search and rescue Huey, of which he was the pilot, and signed that sucker out and had the doors off. And we bombed around Padre Island at like 30 feet and below for an hour, just give me an introduction to helicopter life, and I've never looked back. I loved it.
Awesome. Wow. That's really cool that he did that.
Yeah, it was influential, and that's just one of the reasons I love the Marine Corps, because the officers, as all services, but the Marine Corps especially prides itself in, they really look out for each other. They really look out for the junior officers, and they really try and develop a mentor and do it in the right way. Sometimes it's tough love, and sometimes it's a doors off Huey flight at 30 feet. Hey, it works.
Fantastic.
How could it not work, right? Huey ride at 30 feet.
You have to be completely blind and dead to not enjoy that ride. So, yeah.
Let's circle back, because you have a pretty cool story connected with this time of your life and your grandfather again.
Sure.
And I think it's just one of the neatest stories I've heard in a long time.
Yeah. I think you were referring to the compass, right?
I am.
So, my grandfather, he served in the early year 1945. He got his wings in 42. He was an instructor pilot in various multi-engine airplanes for 2 years, and say, hey, I want to go overseas and do my part. So they sent him to China, Burma, India theater. And then he went down and walked out. And he was an Eagle Scout, incredible person. Made a trellis, dragged his injured co-pilot out behind him to the jungle. I mean, there's some time when he rode an elephant. I mean, all these crazy, adventures to get out of the jungle. But the whole time he had his survival compass, those little steel ones that I should have grabbed it, but the little steel US stamped, flip open lid, relic, basic compass. And he had that the whole time. And nobody knew about it. He never told anybody about it. Nobody said anything. And I remember as I got selected for aviation eventually, and I got my wings, right? It's a big day. You get your wings of gold, and you've arrived. How little did I know at the time? But you've arrived. It's a big deal. You've got through 2 years of flight training. And he hands me this compass. It says, "This one kept me out of trouble. I hope it keeps you out of trouble." And for the next 4,200 hours of military flying, I always kept it in my left sleeve zipper pocket, every flight suit. So every hour, every medevac, every search and rescue case, every training flight, law enforcement flight, every hurricane, every sandstorm, it was in my pocket, my flight suit. And when I retired in 21, I finally said, I don't want to lose this thing. Because I did lose it once. I don't think I told you, Ryan, but I lost it on a medevac. Yeah, I was running out to the flight line on my third tour in Iraq. Running out to the flight line, it's a 10-minute launch, and somehow the zipper came open and it fell out. And I learned, post-flight, checking all the parts and pieces, make sure I'm still intact after another hot LZ. And like, oh, it's gone. And my heart sank. Heart sank after. This was years. This is my third tour in Iraq, and I was just devastated. And I went over that tarmac with a fine-tooth comb that night and a flashlight, and I just thought I lost it. And then that night I was the flight line at OIC, so I had about 30 Marines that were basically the engineers, the crew chiefs, and door gunners. And this very short Filipina female Marine, tough as nails, comes up to me and said, "Hey, sir, I think you're looking for this." And she had found it.
Oh.
And she held it. She knew about it. I didn't tell anybody about it, but they all knew about it apparently. And she said, "I think this is yours." So she'll never buy a beer in my presence ever again.
Wow.
So I've held that compass, and it's a family heirloom, and I will treasure that forever and maybe pass it on to one of my sons one day.
Incredible. Well, thanks for joining us on the Hangar Z. We can't top that.
It's all downhill from there.
The resume is impressive, but that's amazing, Tony. That the fact that that your grandfather hung on to that is really cool, because some don't. Some vets from that era, they pushed away everything they didn't want to remember. And the fact that he hung on to it, and then he gave it to you, and then you for all those thousands of hours, that's really fantastic. What a great story. I'm glad that you found that.
A lot of miles on that compass. There's a lot of miles on that compass.
They should only tell stories.
It's been around the world. Yeah, the compass has been around the world.
It has.
Thanks to our sponsor, Summit Aviation, a full-service provider for business, government, parapublic, and military aviation, specializing in maintenance, modifications, avionics, interiors, and paint. Discover more at summit-aviation.com.
I had a similar token, not nearly with the background of yours, but a token, and I would call it a good luck charm. But I don't know if it did it for you. It was more on those tough days where you're like, why am I doing this? Or that was not my favorite day. Or, just when you were down, I would feel that, and it would remind me of that moment in life of, that big moment of when I finally made it, or the people that have helped me to get here, and why am I doing this job? Just having that there. So it was, for me, it was more than, the theory of good luck. It was just this constant reminder to sort of recage my perspective in times when I needed it. And Jack, I don't know if you had it. Did you carry anything, or did you have anything around you?
No, I really didn't. I mean, I had a family photo that was that I carried during all my police time. But other than that, no, nothing as cool as those two.
Well, no, and mine didn't have near the story as his. I don't even want to say what it was, but it's just nice to have that reminder once in a while. It's like, oh yeah,
Yeah, and it serves a lot of purposes. There was always the reminder of where I came from, especially in Iraq. I think that was there were a lot of moments where you're like, holy cow, I just got away with another one. I'm on my 13th of 12 lives. 9 lives, however many you want to give them. And, there's that like, okay, I'm still here. We're still good. I'm still going home to these guys and gals that I love so much. And there's a lot of lonely time, as you know, especially any kind of remote piloting that you do. But, in Iraq, you're surrounded with 250 of your best friends on this forward operating base. Especially my second tour, I was a forward air controller with the infantry. And, but you're like, I was a captain, 1 of 2 on this whole base. And, you're not really confiding with a lot of people at that point. And, you see some hard things. And, between Fallujah and Ramadi and some of the action that we saw, you end up just sitting there contemplating, like, what am I doing? Like, this is crazy. Like, what is happening? And I just remember, like, I would just have that in my hands. And I probably rub the US part of the metal, because I would just, kind of rub the metal and just think about it and kind of recenter. Like, there's a reason, we took the fight over here instead of being in our own home. You feel like there's lots of reasons. And in the end, it was just really centering for me to have all those years. So then when I lost it that one time, I really realized like the bottom fell out. And I think part of it, because I was on my 3rd tour and pretty tired at that point, they were back to back with not a lot of downtime in between. And, you just realize how on edge you are for so long. And then just like these little things kind of keep you together. And that loss probably was more devastating than it should be in the real world, but it was an emotional loss. And then to get it back was like refreshing. I'm like, okay, I got this, and can finish out these last 3 or 4 months. So it was really important. And, even had that in my dry suit in the Coast Guard in the Arctic, and, some of those missions that were really, really eyebrow raising, like, what am I doing here kind of missions. And you still feel that presence right there. It was always in the same spot, even in the infantry, the shoulder sleeve, it was always right here. I see this, do this all the time. You just kind of tap in your left else, and there it is. So
did you specifically think about, in the times when you're like, having a bad day, and you're going, man, what am I doing here kind of day? Did you think about your grandfather in that jungle? Specifically where you go, this could be worse.
I did. I was walking downtown Baghdad on foot, which isn't a super fun time. and especially around Fallujah. I never really walked downtown. I flew into Baghdad, but I never walked it too much, other than a couple times. But we patrolled their first Fallujah. There were times you're walking, and you're alert and you're hyper focused, but your mind wanders at the same time, and you think, man, this is good. Like this, what am I doing here? And then I'm like, well, at least I'm not walking out of a jungle with no search and rescue capability whatsoever, and the Japanese are hunting me personally, dragging a wounded guy behind me.
Yeah. Self-rescuing.
I mean, I didn't get to ride an elephant like he did, but
jeez.
It's a reminder, like, hey, you know what? Things can get bad, but they're never that bad.
Yeah. And if and when he got caught, he's done.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's done. There's no, like you said, the cavalry's not coming. They didn't even know he was alive. No one was looking for him. Right. The jungle's so vast. They didn't know where he went down. Yeah. I mean, like I said, my grandmother received a missing in action telegram that we still have, and 8 days later, you're not missing anymore. All right, get back to work. Like, holy cow. Whole different generation, right?
Brush your teeth, you fly in 2 hours.
No kidding. But
the paper cut generation it did not exist then,
Yeah, anytime I was feeling sorry for myself, I'm like, suck it up, buttercup. Let's get to work. Like, we got a family tradition to keep up here.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah, he's getting out with a compass, and we have people if their phone isn't working. I don't have Wi-Fi. I can't get to the store.
Oh my gosh.
Well, it's funny because if people are so reliant on the phones now, in the Coast Guard, and we can get to this later, but people would do their distress call outs on Facebook. That was one of the things we had to deal with, some of the early 2000s hurricanes and stuff. And I was only peripherally involved with that. People were like, hey, I need help. And they can't get through on 911. Why? Because all the operators are trying to use them. All the rescue folks are trying to use their own cell phones. But yeah, they'd go out on social media saying, hey, here I am, come get me. And I mean, one of them, I was like, okay, that's pretty ludicrous. And we actually had to develop a system to screen social media for these distress calls and incorporate that into our rescue planning. But two, it's like, that's your go-to, like social media? Like that's your way out? Like, how about you just go find some floating lumber and build a raft and get something yourself out? I'm like, let's get to work.
Yeah. Like, don't you have a compass? Don't you have a compass and start walking?
Come on. I mean, I don't want to be asympathetic. You do what you can to get help. But yeah, it's a different world now.
Well, let's take your grandfather's compass and take it to Iraq. So you got your first tour, flying the Mighty Frog. Right. What kind of flying were you doing? Where were you based?
We started out in Al Asad, which is in Kuwait. So we went over at the beginning for the build-up in 2003. We got there in February of 2003, spent a month in a tent city with 5,000 Marines and 2 Porta-Johns, really. Some interesting experiences there. And, it's the Afghanistan had been going on for 2 years at this point, almost a year, I think. So there was some piece of that, but that was still very small. Afghanistan hadn't really ramped up yet. So this was like the big first time. So the Marine Corps was learning a lot. I was learning a lot. It was a lot of tough learning experiences early on, just logistically, like how do you do this? But we were in Al Asad Air Base, which is just south of the border. I can't remember how far it is, maybe 50 miles or so, out in the middle of the desert. And it went from a sleepy Kuwaiti airstrip to 5,000 Marines in tents and basically the 3rd Marine Air Wing, that's a Mag 39 helicopter air group. And we were staged. And so just trying to figure out what the mission was interesting because, as you know, the Marine Corps does not have dedicated medevac like the Army does. We don't have medevac. We have what's called CASEVAC, casualty evacuation, which is armed medevac. Because by Geneva Convention, if you put the Red Cross on the side, you're not supposed to have crew-served weapons on the side. Now, there are plenty of M249 door gunners hanging out with the Army, and I know they do that quite often, and there might be some deviations on that. But by Geneva Convention, which we still honor, my understanding is the Army cannot put a crew-served weapon. Well, the Marine Corps said, well, that didn't work out very well in Vietnam, so we're not doing that anymore. So we don't put Red Crosses on our helicopters. We just put 50 caliber machine guns on the side, and when they start shooting us, we shoot back. Which usually, 300 rounds of shut the F up works pretty well. And so we were nominally letting or having the Army do our medevac planning. My understanding, I'm just a captain, right? I'm a junior captain this time. So the big picture and the planning, I will not pretend to understand everything that was going on. But from my perspective, my understanding, our job was assault support. So the same helicopter, mostly putting troops in and out of the landing zones, right? Putting them in and out of raid positions or forward operating locations. So that was our first initial planning is, well, we're going to do one of the biggest raids since Vietnam. The Marine Corps done, I think it was like 40 helicopters, and we're going to do what's called the Alpha Peninsula. And then the war is going to kick off. We're going to do this massive raid and take out the anti-shipping missiles that are staged down at the very mouth of the Euphrates River so they don't take shots at our ships out in the Gulf. And we're going to put the British 4-2 Commando Brigade in using our helicopters. And that's what we practiced. And that's what we rehearsed for, is massive operation. Didn't quite go that way. So my introduction to war was I was doing a functional check flight ground turn, sitting on the frog out in the flight line. And, blazing hot, even in February. And we're just doing a ground turn. And Humvee, I mean, there's not a tower per se. There was a little bit of a control zone, but there's not like a control tower that was really doing much for us. And down the flight line, because we're pretty far out the flight line, comes this Humvee that's stopping at every helicopter. And I'm just staring. I'm like, this is probably March 21st. So 2-3 days before the war was definitely supposed to kick off. And he comes ripping up, and we're kind of looking over, and the head's still turning. And he comes pulling up, and he goes up to my crew chief, who's on a long cord out front, like they usually off ground. And my crew chief goes, "Incoming." Oh, the what? Incoming what? Incoming Humvee? He's like, "No, they're shooting at us." I'm like, "We've got Scud missiles incoming." I'm like, "Oh. Okay, well, let's go ahead and shut this thing down and grab your gas mask," because we were fully expecting a chemical attack. And we had the gas masks were sitting in the cockpit, and our mop suits are in the back. Humvee's like, I'm like, "Tell that Humvee to wait." And so he holds on, and everybody, it's just, you get that first initial, and I'm like, "Get out," ready to get out of the helicopter, because we're not going to take off from this, half functional helicopter. Emergency didn't shut down. We grab the gas mask. We jump out of the helicopter. We all pile in the back of the Humvee. The Humvee takes off down the flight line, and we're making towards what these half-built bunkers, which aren't even finished yet. These sort of box holes that have these cement structures that are supposed to hold sand. But there's no sand on top of it yet. It's just cement, which is a really good bomb shelter, by the way. But they hadn't even finished building these things because nobody expected this to happen before we said it was going to happen. And so I just remember, you breathe in, that's all fogging up, you throw it on, trying to get your mop suit on, the back of the Humvee that's bumping down the road, we go piling in, all of a sudden, we can make it to the bunker, I'll hear this boom, 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 right overhead, and the Patriot missiles are shooting down the Scuds, and I was welcome to war, you never saw it coming, and you're just sitting there hyperventilating, you have no idea what's going on, no one's talking to you, now I'm just another body in a bunker, I didn't even have a weapon, there's nothing I can do about it anyway, I'm not involved, there's no communication. So we sat there for an hour until we got the all clear, and welcome to war. That was not what anybody thought was happening. And the next thing I knew, Alpha mission was happening that night. So scramble, we put that together. And like I said, this story could go on for hours, but that first day of chaos, the Alpha mission, the sandstorms came in. I don't know if you remember the first couple of days of the war, the first couple of weeks of this giant sandstorm. So it really shut airspaces down. Zero alumni in the goggles, 40 helicopters in the air at low level, with an impromptu advanced timeline, trying to coordinate the pickup and going to an LZ. And unfortunately, we lost a helicopter with the CFIT. They flew right into the ground. One of the first waves in. Great friend of mine from flight school, Ryan, I'll just put it that way. They were dash 4. They got separated. No visible horizon, we believe, because I saw it and there was no horizon. You're at 100 feet already and just kill everybody on board, which was a hell of an introduction to war, right? They didn't get shot down. They flew right into the ground. And so we ended up going back and resetting. And I later found out that Ryan probably saved my life by dying, because the LZ that I was going to was later overrun by the commandos from the sea. It was sort of a joint. They were coming from the sea and we're in the air. It was overrun. The LZ I was going to, where my section of 2 helicopters were going to land in, I had a ZSU-24 in it, which is a 4-barrel tanked, attract helicopter killer vehicle in it. That was armed and ready to go. And we would have flown right into that. And there's a good chance, as the lead of the 2 helicopters, we would have taken a face full of 50 cal point blank range. Probably not a great outcome for me. So, find that out a day or two later, and you're just like, holy cow, that could have happened. And so that was an immediate shift in your head, like, this is real. This is real. And then we sat for 2 days because all the assaults that they were going to use us for weren't necessary anymore, because we blew right through the forward advanced areas that we expected to. So we weren't going to be used. And so we sat around. And that's, it's a long time to sit and think about those we lost already. And the near death that was that could have happened. And then the frustration of, like, why am I being used? I came all the way here. I got a perfectly good helicopters and crews and a squadron's ready to go, and then they don't have anything used for us. And so we, that frustration of, like, I want to get back in it, and it's just not what you read about. It's not what you expect war to be like, right? And we all have this mental image of, like, what it's going to be like, and, firefights and spec ops guys, and they're all kicking butt and, behind enemy lines. But the vast majority of us are sitting around not knowing what the hell's going on, waiting for the call. Right. And that's a vast majority of us, like, hurry up and wait. Right. And then we got the call. I was like, what? So they hit Antarctica, which is the first major city across the border, and pretty famous battles there, and pretty ugly. The Army blew right through it. So they actually went through it so fast that they didn't clear it because they didn't have any resistance. And they kept going up Highway 1 towards Baghdad, but the Marine Corps was tasked with cleaning it up, and it got ugly. And that's when all the resistance came out. And so we had a lot of firefights, a lot of casualties there. And they said, hey, the Army is not going to do medevac for that area for whatever reason. We have some theories about why they weren't going to do it. And I'll just leave it at that out of respect for what they do. But we got the call saying, hey, you take a section or division of 4 H-46s and go do the medevacs. Medevac? Well, we haven't got an SOP for that. We didn't plan for it. We didn't have a really good idea how to do it. I didn't know where to pick them up. I didn't know where to take them. We didn't have docks, honestly. So my helicopter, we grabbed the squadron corpsman, the admin guy, who had basic, first aid knowledge. And, hey, you're a corpsman. Now you're the flying hot LZ corpsman. And that poor guy, he went with us. He got back a helicopter, right?
Wow.
And somebody's like, hey, where are the litters at? Right? They break them out of storage, right? How do you mount these things up? Right? And it's really odd in a 46, if you ever get a chance to go see, more in the museum now, they actually have these, like, cloth stanchions that go from ceiling to floor, and then they basically hook the litters in rows of 3, and you kind of have the 12 in the back of a 46, right? So we would fly with 6 on one side, and we had a bench seat down for walking wounded on the other side, which is kind of what we came up with eventually. But nobody had ever really done that before. So literally, we took off because the urgency was pretty high, and it was dusk, and we had folded up litters and a bunch of stanchions that no one had really figured out, and the crew chiefs were amazing, and they figured it out on the fly, literally, as we're going into the combat zone. Like, how do you mount these things up, right? And so we got them sorted out, and then we got to figure out where they're at, and we're trying to get the directions, and Nazarene was crazy, and they didn't have a very clear system of communicating and tasking and who's going where and what frequencies. I mean, it was, from my perspective as a junior, captain, it was chaos. It's chaos. So welcome to war, right? So we just had to figure out. And I know I'm rambling, so stop me any time. I could go for hours. But my biggest memory from that is I remember we were just south of Antarctica, right? And you could see tracers, all around, right? You could see them in the sky on the night vision goggles. You can see the firefights on the ground. You can see the lights. You can see the main column that are going north. So we're like, if the headlights are pointing north, they're probably good guys. And if their headlights are pointing south, they're probably not. And I remember we're over sort of this dark area. It was kind of swampy, Euphrates estuary type of. And I remember, and I'm sitting in the right seat, and I look over, and I see this blinking light, coming up the ground. And I'm like, it looks like a beacon. So what's going on? And I look over, I'm like, you know what that blinking light is? My right door gunner opens up because we're getting shot at. I didn't even know it, right? It's just a muzzle flash. Somebody was shooting at us, and that's what it looks like right at you. It looks like a blinking light. And I'm like, oh, and the right door gun opens up because if you're ever in a helicopter with a 50 cal shooting it, it's significant noise, and it moves the helicopter. And so all of a sudden, and then he starts opening up on the right door gun, he shoots back, and I'm like, oh, that's like being shot at. Okay. It's surreal. Not the last time I got shot at, but certainly the first time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was really chaotic. We did find we found an LZ. I'm not sure if there's one they wanted us to go to, and they had casualties, and we took them out, and we got to figure out where to take them. And yeah, it was a lot of improvisation early on, and they eventually got more organized over the weeks, and this made these patient evaluation teams, and they kind of figure out how to organize this better. But yeah, in the beginning, your original question is like, what did we do? Is like, we did a little bit of everything.
When every second counts, trust Night Flight Concepts to keep you mission ready. With advanced night vision technology, FAA certified repair services, and expert training, we've got your six. Visit nightflightconcepts.com to learn more.
Whatever you needed. I know you never served in law enforcement, but having been through all that, you had the skill set to deal with most of what we do. Here, go do this. We have no idea how to do it. We probably don't have the right equipment, and it'll take a month to do it right, and you have like 3 hours. So right. a lot of parallels there, but wow, what an experience. And, again, as you said, the perspective for those of us who haven't been in that situation is everything's set up. There's, you've practiced for it, you've trained for it, and you're going in there just applying what has already been more or less set up. And the situation was very different. It's, we haven't trained for it. We don't know how to do it. We just need to figure it out, which I think is a very helicopter thing to do,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was not that much different than the Coast Guard, right? They train us highly trained in the Coast Guard, and we have set ways to do certain evolutions. But in the end, you're probably 200 plus miles from the nearest help, and you may or may not be able to talk to anybody, and things are always dynamic. And there's certain ways to approach a boat, and certain ways to hoist people, and certain ways to handle SOPs. But in the end, like you're winging it. You're trying to figure out, like, how am I going to make this happen? Do I evacuate that person? What do I do? How do I get the swimmer down? And there's not a lot of guidance on the airpoint. And that's one thing I love about helicopters. I've always loved it is at the end of the day, almost every helicopter pilot is winging it and doing a good job of it.
Well, and I think, and we've talked about it before, the whole concept of human factors usually is talked about in a negative way. The human factors, how they work against it, the fatigue, what stress, whatever. But I think there's a certain positive aspect to human factors that we forget to talk about, which is that human ability for decision making in unscripted environments like that, to not have all the answers, to be in a situation we haven't even discussed before, let alone practiced, and be able to apply, those human factors, that human element, to come up with a workable solution to a positive outcome is one of the amazing things about us as helicopter people.
It's time for your Heli Life giveaway buzzword. Listen up and remember this word because you'll need it to enter for a chance to win exclusive Heli Life gear. Ready? This episode's buzzword is manhunt. Visit contest.verticalhelicasts.com to enter the buzzword.
And you're doing that while moving like a monkey, right? Your hands and feet are doing crazy, like physical things to keep yourself, flying and safe. But your mind is also working in 20 different directions, trying to solve all the other external problems at the same time. So I have to laugh. I know I'm not supposed to talk about the fact that I fly airlines now, but in that interview, their first, one of the screener questions was, how much of a planner are you? And my first gut was like, 0. like I don't need to. Like I just go and I wing it. And then somebody goes, don't say that. Because it's very regimented. And, there are some times you have to come up with solutions. But by and large, it's fairly scripted, detailed. Don't get me wrong. It's not easy and much harder than I thought it was going to be. But in the end, you don't have that improvisation in the 121 world as you see in the helicopter world. But I do think your adaptability and flexibility and stress management is far beyond your average human being, because you have to be, otherwise you wouldn't survive it.
Exactly. And, and that ties into a whole nother conversation, the importance of the training and the experience and getting people set up properly to deal with those situations, because you can't script them all out. They're going to be in this world where it's talking about AI and automation and stuff, and it's like, oh, that's cute, but we're a long ways off from being able to duplicate what an experienced helicopter air crewman's mind, because you mentioned your crew chiefs and stuff too, and that's exactly the same. Here's a problem we've never discussed before. Go solve it under the worst of conditions. Otherwise, you or somebody else is going to die. Go. That's an amazing part of our industry, is that we have people who can do that almost to the point of it's not notable. That's just Tuesday. That's just another thing that we do.
It's an expectation.
Right. And that was actually later on. I had a sector commander and my first tour in the Coast Guard in San Diego. And she was a outstanding officer, very senior surface person, a cutterman. And she was the second in command, right? So it's an air station, but it's a sector at the same time. It's super complicated. Somebody's great idea, integrate all that together. So you had an aviator commander and a non-aviator XO, basically. And the non-aviator XO came in and just didn't understand, like, hey, what are these like slider days off you get? And what's this whole crew rest thing? We don't need that in the cutters. Like, what do you do? And, you guys come back from these missions and you look happy and it looks like it's fun and it's all good. I'm like, why don't you go with us? And, a lot of these missions are fun and a lot of times it's not that bad. And sometimes you get more crew rest than we really need, but sometimes it's not enough. And it's those, once or twice a month, and especially in San Diego, like once or twice a month, you're like, I'm going to need a month off from that to recover from what just happened. And, and then being bright-eyed and bushy-tailed at the end of it, it's just because we love what we do. It has nothing to do with how tired we are or mentally worn out we are.
Well, I want to make sure we get to everything. So let's move on. You survived your first tour.
Yeah.
Somehow.
Now
your second one is a non-flying tour, correct?
Right. So the Marine Corps, since World War II, since we never had heavy artillery, so here's a history lesson for you. Marine Corps never really had heavy artillery because we're supposed to be amphibious assault from the ships, and the ships were artillery, but the ships weren't always there, so we had to come up with our own artillery, which turned out to be aviation. And back then, they would basically take pilots from a squadron and put them in a Jeep and a radio, and then you would tell the pilots where to drop the bombs, right? So forward air controllers. And that has never really changed. The Marine Corps still does that. I know the enlisted have what's called JTACs, usually enlisted MOS that specializes in doing that. And they're outstanding, don't get me wrong. I mean, those guys, they are excellent guys and gals. But the Marine Corps still pulls a winged aviator, usually the junior aircraft commander of the squadron, and sends you to either an infantry battalion or maybe even an LAR, light armored reconnaissance, or a tank battalion occasion if you're lucky. I got lucky and got infantry. And I just got back. I was home. I was first tour was 8 months. Got home in October. I got the orders to go to be a forward air controller, which I wasn't super excited about. But okay, we're supposed to go to Okinawa. I was always wanted to go to Okinawa, so that sounds okay. That's a good deal. I had some personal stuff going on, as most of us did at the time, so it was a difficult time in my family. But I checked into the battalion, 29 Palms, which is a lovely place to hang out in the desert if you've ever been to California. And I checked in, and the battalion commander said, hey, we're going back to Iraq, and we're the first ones deploying, so we're going back to Iraq in February. I just did that. I'm good. Thanks, but no thanks. And so I was one of, I believe, 4 people in the battalion who had been to Iraq. And we're talking 1,200 Marines, because they basically build these battalions up to deploy to full strength, and they have a cadre of NCOs and officers. And about 3/4 of the battalion straight out of boot camp, right? And they fill them up with Lance Corporals, privates, and PFCs, and then we go. So ended up being there forward air controllers, 3 of us. The 2 junior pilots or forward air controllers are line forward air controllers, and then the senior guy is like the staff officer up at headquarters coordinating, getting us the support. And so we went back to Iraq, which was a different perspective. So this is the invasion part was over. So this is the early 2004 now. There was this lull that we may or may not remember. The Army moved in to sort of occupy and stabilize, and then the insurgency started. And they really started to have a lot of problems. And so this is, General Mattis's no better friend, no worse enemy time. And so we went in, but we were still light infantry, right? So we're not talking up armored Humvees. We're not talking Stryker vehicles. We're not talking armor at all, right? I carried an M16A2, if anybody remembers what those were, right? The full long rifle. And we walked into Iraq. And so I ended up getting assigned to a forward operating base in a place called HIT, H-I-T, which was a town that had the only bridge over the Euphrates for 40 miles between Ramadi and the Haditha Dam on the sort of northwest side. And so this forward operating base was a company sized and me. And so we basically lived in this forward operating base for 8 months. And I would basically call in response for the contact that we had, or medevacs if we had that as well.
So how much training did you get in that at 29 Palms? I mean, was it that intense training, or was it a little training so that you understood what a forward air controller needed to do?
Oh, sure. There's a school, right? Tactical Air Control Party School. It's out of Coronado in San Diego.
Okay.
Amphibious Warfare School does it down there. And it's a month. So I spent 1 month of my 4 months at home at this school, and then in the very cold Christmas in 29 Palms, practicing dropping bombs on people's heads. So, they spool you up. It's a great training. It's 4 months, learn what I need to know. And you combine that with my experience in the medevac side, which they don't really teach you because everybody thinks it's easy. It's not. And so when I showed up in January to my battalion, we basically, the platoons were out practicing independent ops, and they would do aviation portion of it. And I would go out and I would talk to these squad leaders and platoon commanders and say, look, here's what you need to know, and here's how you knock it out, and here's how you set security. And so I would train them. But I felt pretty confident with what I was going to do. So here's my story. Right. There's a couple of tough ones. Fallujah, we did the first Fallujah, where we kind of went in the perimeter, but we didn't go all the way in. That was in spring. And then the big battle of Fallujah was in the fall after we left anyway. So, we had a couple of interesting weeks doing that. But, we had a couple of other interesting times when we were in the city of 100,000 Iraqis of heat and the 250 Marines. It's not a really fun time either. But honestly, it was when we were in Kuwait, right? So we were going to march in. So we staged in Kuwait. And the whole regiment, 7th Marine Regiment, was going to basically drive our unarmored Humvees all the way up Highway 1, past Baghdad, and go to our base in Al-Assad, and for us, go to Heat. And so they have this big meeting of all the battalion commanders and their seconds and staff elements. And they have like a big sand table, right? So picture, you got GP tents, and you got this big sand table. Somebody had drawn out a beautiful map of Iraq in the sand with all the terrain features and blocks, buildings. And so they could talk it out, and they had all the planning and piece of it. And then they go on, and my battalion commander asked me, he said, hey, there's a piece of this whole brief that talks about, admin and signal, and part of the admin, this tiny little subset of this giant brief was meta. And he's like, hey, would you mind doing that brief? And so I was like, well, I want to do my due diligence because it's the colonel and other lieutenant colonels, and I don't want to look like a fool. So, and I would be the one that's calling a medevac. So they'd given us these cards, right? They, some staff officer had put together these little shoulder cards next to my compass, and little cards that had frequencies to call in case you need to call a medevac, because the Army, again, is doing our medevac work, supposedly. So I called them. I called all those numbers. Not a single one worked, right? Not a single one worked. And for various reasons, they had the wrong FM frequency on there. And so I just, do my due diligence. I line these things out. I made notes in my card, take care of my guys. That was my job. And stuck in my pocket. And then when the town CO said, hey, would you mind doing this part? Roger that. So they did this long brief, and you kind of look around, and everybody's kind of like, they're serious, but they already know, right? All these 05s and 06s in the Marine Corps, and E9s, sergeants majors and stuff, these salty dogs, right? And here I am, this young captain. But I was one of the few that had actually been here before. And so they got to me, and I walked out, and I didn't even think about it. As Bryan can tell you, I don't have a lot of tact. And I walked out in the middle of the stand table, and I said, gentlemen, if you want to save you Marines' lives, break out your medevac cards and copy this down. And there was this stunned silence. And I didn't really think about it. I just said it because I was like, if you want to save Marines' lives, I was being honest. Like, if you want to save their lives, like, you want these frequencies I'm about to give you, And I walked them through the route. I'm like, if you're here, I want you to call this number, not that number. And this is how you talk. And this is how, the medevac frequency, I think it's like 33.5 or something, the common frequency here. And this is who's going to come get you here. Here's probably how much time it's going to take here. And I look down, and I'm not really looking at anybody else. I'm just like reading my card. I'm walking around this map, stepping all over the work they'd done. And then I kind of like looked up and I said, any questions? And I saw nothing but the taps of a bunch of covers. Is all these 04s and 05s and 06s and E9s and E8s are writing this furiously down. They're writing all this stuff down. And I'm like, okay, that worked. Good. And I walked off. And my colonel sitting over there, Colonel Scuda, he looked at me and he goes, I have never in all my years seen an 05 and 06 write down notes at one of these. You're the first. Like, that was awesome. And so I'm like, okay, great. And I didn't think about it. That night, Colonel comes into my tent and he goes, hey, Lumpy, this may sound weird. And I'm going to give you the option, but the regimental colonel wants you on his staff. So you could go be on regimental staff if you want. He's asking for you, but it's your choice, and you'd be probably safer, right? Frankly, like you're on regimental staff, you're not going to be out with the platoons walking around the cities, and there's that moment in your head of, it's probably smart. And it's probably good for your career to go do that, right? I said, sir, you're my guys. I want to stay with you. And I did. And so I walked around Iraq a lot after that.
We talked a little bit about it, and I'd like to bring it up because I think it's applicable to all kinds of different aspects of public safety, aviation. The whole idea of the forward air controller and having somebody on the ground knowing how to talk to the aircrew, knowing the information they need to help them do their job better is a dream for like folks in the law enforcement background, because the miscommunication between air and ground and the lack of information is just this rampant problem. It surfaces at some level, I think, on almost every single call. We're not getting the information we need. Trying just to find what channel everybody's working on this call. You get over a call and you look down, there's people running around and like, I see them on the radio. I don't hear what channel are they on? And by the time you figure that out, the whole foot chase is over. And, or like I said, you get on scene and then they decide to tell you the vehicle description of the suspects that left 5 minutes ago. And you're like, crap, I saw one of those on the highway on the way in.
Yes.
I needed that information. So, and through the years, we've talked about like ideas like the 9-line and stuff, and how nice it would be to formalize the communication and the dispatch between air and ground. Can you tell us a little bit about that and your thoughts on how you can just improve that information flow back and forth between the air and the ground?
Thank you to our sponsor, Robinson Helicopter Company, the choice for unrivaled safety and reliability, so you can accomplish any mission with confidence. For more than half a century, Robinson has been at the forefront of the helicopter industry. From the R-22 to the R-66 turbine, Robinson makes helicopters accessible so more people can accomplish more missions. Climb higher. For additional information, visit www.robinsonheli.com.
So I am not the authority, because this was a long time ago, and I know some things have changed. When people talk about 9 lines, there's actually really, every service has a slightly different version of it. And even between a tactical close air support 9 line and a medevac 9 line, there are differences, right? You're calling for
and real quick
reasons.
For anybody who doesn't know, can you quickly describe what a 9 line is?
A 9 line is the 9 lines of information that a person on the ground is going to feed the aviator. The details of when and where and how and what. And it's scripted. Like I said, every service is kind of a different version of it, and there's 2 different versions of it. But they use a 9 line because we're talking about, location, signaling, type of enemy contact, type of injured, or what's your mission. And if you're doing a tactical, what's your run-in heading, where's the nearest friendlies, how close. They're going to talk about type of ordnance requested and that kind of thing. So it's a very specific details that you typically would send through the chain of commands, and they would request the right asset, and then they would bring that asset on site, with that information already in hand. So if you're up in the cockpit, you're already like, all right, I know where I'm going. I know what I'm looking for. I know where the good guys are, and I probably where the bad guys are. And I know, so that you can show up, like you said, Bryan, like you're showing up on scene ready to look, ready to operate. But as you know, that gets lost in translation quite often. And between the delay of call and delay of show up, things change. And so what I would do, and maybe not necessarily officially sanctioned way, you got to remember, like the guys that are putting these together are E3s and E4s. Like they're the radio operator typically who is getting shot or just had an IED go off and kill a bunch of his buddies, or, in the middle of the city and the pressure's on and things are happening. You're trying to organize your thoughts. Like trying to give that kind of level of detail is really tough. And so that's one reason they have guys like me and JTACs and forward air controllers to your whole job is to focus on that, right? I was never in tactical command of anybody. All right, and that was by design, so that I could focus on, hey, where do you want me to hit? Okay, that building, they're shooting us from the top floor. I'll take care of it. All right, make sure our guys are back from this road. And now I'm working that problem, right? And hopefully not shooting at the same time, but I'm working that problem. And that makes it really tough. Just like I would imagine in law enforcement, your operators, like your officers are, they're cleaning rooms, so they're trying to get around down alleyways, they're chasing a suspect, and they don't have a lot of time to go, hey, I'm running down this alleyway and there's a guy in a blue shirt ahead of me. Where's he at? Right. And you're like, that's a lot to see from the air. But my training, my suggestions to these guys were like, hey, I just need you to communicate to somebody higher level than you where you're at, what you need, and what frequency you're on. Like if you can give me those 3 bits of information. So it's the first 3 lines of the 9 line. Like those first 3 lines, and you could use that for medevac or close air support. You're like, hey, I'm at this latitude and longitude. Like we've got wounded, or I've got contact on top of this building and we're pinned down. Like some descriptor of what's going on. And then, hey, I'm on this tactical final frequency. This is my company freak or my squad freak or whatever. So that when, close air support's overhead, they can actually talk to that person, because that information is probably 30 minutes old by the time you get there, or 15 minutes old, depending on response times. So whatever the guy spent 30 minutes trying to write down under fire and send up is probably not really useful anyway, right? And especially if you're not a trained forward air controller. So really, if you could at least get that bits of information out so that when the air asset gets on scene, they know who am I talking to? And why am I here again? And where are you at? Okay. You can figure that out, then you're going to wing it. And you're going to be able to wing it, basically.
We did it all the time. We did it constantly, trying to train our ground officers exactly what you're talking about, Tony. Just keep it simple. Where are you? Specifically, where are you? Not I'm kind of here. No, I want to know exactly where you are. Where did you last see the suspect? How long ago did you see the suspect? And what did they look like? And what direction were they going? Just those basic things made a huge difference in our ability to do our job. It's exactly the same. And the clearer that information is, the better you are as an air asset. That's just how it is. I mean, if it's muddled in the beginning, it's not going to get any better. Going to that aircraft, the aircraft's going to get there and go, I have no idea what you want.
I mean, I can't tell you how many times you'd come in on like when I was in the medevac portion of that, we'd show up and not only were they not at the lat long that they told us because they were moving, right?
Yep.
And not only were there more casualties at this point because they're 30 minutes later and the firefight's still going. So now we got twice as many, Marines at the back. And by the way, now they're surrounded. And guess what? When we show up, they're not getting shot at anymore. We are. So, okay, we're going in anyway. All right, we're going to figure this out. And so those are the 3 bits of information that I typically would keep track of. Like, where were they last known? What frequency do you think they're on? And what am I trying to accomplish here?
Yep.
And then from
there, starting point, right?
It's a starting point. And it's mostly for the guys on the ground. Not all the people in between the guy on the ground and the guy in the middle, they're like, I need more information because they're tracking stuff. And if you're dropping laser guided bombs, like, let's be clear, like, you have to have all that information. Yeah. But typically, like, everybody sees the YouTube videos of the grunting contact in Afghanistan. They're like, hey, that tree line, this is our smart, and the A-10 guys rolling hot, they kill everything, and it's great, right? But those guys, they typically aren't operating in a confined area, for sure. And typically those are called FAC-As, forward air controllers, airborne, and they have extra training to try and pull that information out of the guys on the ground so that they can come up with their own clear runs, right? And so that is also a way to handle it, because there's just not enough forward controllers and JTACs. There's just not enough to go around, and you're never in the right spot. Like I did a lot of running from there to where, like where are they at? And I'm running around in circles trying to figure out, I gotta get eyes on, right? And so I spent a lot of time. There's not enough eyes to go around. So sometimes it's an E4 corporal in contact with whatever asset showed up, be it an F-18 or an A-10 or a Cobra, because usually it's joint, whoever's available, and then they got to be able to communicate. And whatever you put in the 9 line at that point, like, look, here's where we're at, here's what's going on, and here's how you talk to me. And after that, you can make it happen.
Cool. All right, Tony, I want to move on to your next phase, but before we get there, I'm going to ask you 2 things. One, and I'll tell you now so you can think about it for a second while you tell me the other one, which is a shorter story.
Okay.
Your most impactful mission in Iraq. But before that, I believe you told me that you had an opportunity to meet the future commandant of the Marine Corps, a face-to-face meeting. Is that
Can't
correct?
believe you brought that up. Yeah. Well, it depends if you want like the quintessential in the shit story or the comical you're an idiot story. So I'll give you the full like in the shit story, but the comical one in summation was thanks, Bryan.
Yeah,
I'm not in the Marine Corps anymore. But so we're a medevac section. We had just gotten into Baghdad. They asked us to link up with a battalion headquarters that had sort of circled the wagons at some point, and we're kind of regrouping. And they wanted us to go link up with them so that we can do medevac for them. And this is downtown Baghdad. We don't have any maps. I hadn't had a map since the day one of the war because we didn't have enough. And so we were like, you got a lat long and in the froggy, there's a pointer. It's like, go that way, right? So we're bombing along, looking, just flying through Baghdad. And, you don't fly very high. Honestly, you're popping up to go over the lampposts and stuff. So you're staying low. You're looking up at the rooftops, and we're just yanking and banging through the streets trying to find where this pointer's going. Not a lot of information. And we have these flare pods on the sponsons. It's chaff and flare, right? So at our altitude, those things basically detect a launch of a surface air missile. It sees the plume. So it actually says an optical sensor. It sees the plume of the launch and kicks off a chaff or a flare or both, depending on how you set it, called an Heli. And so the things are like, boop, 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 and there's a lot of fire. There's a lot of fires in Baghdad at this point. And so, it's kind of happening all the time, because I don't know the difference between a building on fire and somebody firing a surface air missile or an RPG. And wouldn't see an RPG, but I would see the plume of a surface air missile. So that's how we're operating, and every now and then it just chunks out, and you're like, okay, if it's going to hit us again, there's nothing I'm going to be able to do. I'm not going to be able to dodge a sand at 300 feet or 200 feet or 100 feet. Like, you're not going to be able to do any of that. So I come banking around the corner, and I look down, and you can see in this parking lot next to remember the Ministry of Information, there is no invasion. They're not anywhere close, and it's blowing up in the background. Well, that building was where,
Bob, right?
Exactly. So that building, I walked through it, but we were supposed to land next. I could see the headquarters vehicles and troops are all around that building, and it's a parking lot, and I got it. But I didn't see it till I came around the corner, at 50 feet or lower. And, of course, there goes my ALE because there's some smoke or something, right? So chaff flare goes out, and I'm like, well, you turn around and kind of get on your approach, and we kind of land, and we kind of snuggle in between the tents and the vehicles, and, they didn't leave us a lot of room as usual. And unfortunately, some of the tents get blown over, right? Little rotor wash in a 24,000 pound helicopter. And we land, and my crew chief goes out on long core. We're doing our shutdown stuff. And I see these 2 older Marines storming mad. They come walking over. And anyway, I thought it was like some pissed off sergeant major that blew some tents over. I'm like, hey, I should have picked a bigger LZ. Whatever. I'm a little jaded at this point. And I said, hey, tell those guys to F off. Because to my crew chief, right? Probably not the best choice of words, but he does, because he's a good staff sergeant, and he told me to F off. And he turns around to do it, and I kind of see him, and he goes, sir, I don't think I can tell these guys to F off. I'm like, what are you talking about? And these guys keep coming. They come all around the door. They come in behind, then up the ramp, and they come in, and I see this face right here. And I look down at the flak vest, and there's stars. Like, silver stars right there. I'm like, oh, hello, General. And he's right here, and he's mad. He's like, what are you doing launching chaff and flare over my ammo dump? And I'm like, sorry. And he's like literally right. There's not a lot of room in a frog between the tunnel and the sit. And he's like right here in my face. And he is red-faced, and he's mad, and he's older, and he's a general. And I said, well, sir, we are, I'm yelling because the engine is still running. It's still loud. So I'm yelling. I'm like, hey, sir, we're on automatic per MAG 39 SOP at low level helicopters. We're all on automatic dispenser because you can do a manual dispense too. And he goes, that's bullshit. I was an F-18 pilot. I know you can control that better than that. I'm like, sir, there's a big difference between 100 feet and 10,000 feet. And he goes, God damn it, who's your responding commander? HMM from 64, sorry about that. And he's like, I'll be in contact. And he storms off. That was General Amos, who was later the Marine Corps Commandant. So the best part of the story, though, he storms off. My little career dissipation lights kind of blink in my eye. And I'm like, well, that probably could have gone better. And Staff Sergeant Longcourt, he goes, hey, sir, did you get a coin? No, Staff Sergeant, I don't think I'm getting the coin out of this one. So anyway, that's my humorous story. I called the XO, and he basically said, don't worry about it. You're right. The general's wrong. Never heard anything about it after that. But so that was a longer version of the funny story. But the big one was previous to that. And so we were doing sections of two. We fly in sections of two. We fly out of Kuwait, and in the beginning, we were still pushing through An-Nazariyah. We just gone through An-Nazariyah, and there's still like combat all around it. And we didn't have very good maps. Like our maps ended at An-Nazariyah, so going up highway went. And so these sections of two would link up with battalion headquarters or regimental headquarters, and then we would do the medevacs like face to face. So like, hey, we just got a call in. I need you to launch your helicopters, go there, and then take them back to the rear and come back here. And it was super dynamic. Again, we're making this up as we go along. And so this big schmall happens, which is that big wall of sand. If you ever see the movies, that is real, and it happened. And we were stuck just north of An-Nazariyah at this regimental headquarters for a couple days. Sand everywhere, like some crazy orange glow. Everything is covered. It's really probably not healthy for you. And the sand in Iraq is like ash, if you've ever heard of it. Like it floats because it's so old, because like it's been rubbed really fine. So the sand just gets it everywhere. And I think I still have it in my foot locker. It's like there's sand everywhere. Anyway, this floats. But combat's still happening. And so they finally came to us. I think it cleared up to the point where I could see both ends of the helicopter at the same time. And they come out to us and they said, hey, we have a couple guys that are hurt pretty bad. And one's got a bullet in his spine. Would you be willing to take these guys back? Because we were 100 miles north at that point. I mean, they're not going to drive back, not with a bullet in the spine. So they're like, okay, well, we'll give it a shot. That's what we do. All right. There's no minimums in war zone. And so we load up, and they had a bunch of walking wounded too that had kind of accumulated over a couple of days, and they were trying to get these guys back. Plus we had an embedded reporter, and I've got two corpsmen, or two corpsmen, two door runners, two pilots. I mean, it is a fully loaded frog. And we take off, and we get to about 100 feet, lost sight, and lost an engine. Boom. All right, engine flame out. There was this chunk of this wet, because it had rained as well in the desert. So this wet mud went through the engine, flamed out the engine. And yes, twin engine helicopter, a lot of power. One engine, not so much power. Not when you're fully loaded gas, people. So we lost an engine, and I'm drooping turns immediately at less than 100 feet, doing like 70 knots and 70 feet. And I'm like, we're going down. And so I did a controlled run on into the desert. I was on the controls, of course. Lucky me. And we did this landing in the desert, which looks great until you find out the desert isn't as flat as you think it is. We hit a sand dune, put the right main mount through a sand dune. There's a big gouge in the sand dune. Slews the helicopter 90 degrees. Come to a screeching halt in the desert. There's a berm from 100 years ago, built up for some reason. That's right under the chin bubble. If we'd gone any further, we probably would have knocked the nose wheel landing gear off. So we just like this whole dynamic, crazy landing in the sand. And we shut it down. We get everybody off and clean out the shorts. But now we're like a mile or two outside the wire, right? Like we are on our own. There's nobody out there, and we're not good guys all around us. And so the helicopter comes back around, we're like, oh crap, what are you gonna do? It's like, well, we gotta get this guy with the bullet in his spine to the hospital. So we give that person to them, and as many as they could take with them, and they go solo and they take off into the storm. And so there we are, and it's not a good place to be. And we're like, well, we can't just sit here. We can't get a hold of anybody, of course. We don't have sat phones. We don't have any way to communicate with anybody. We're on the grounds. There's no AWACS, or at least the AWACS was not necessarily talking to us. Helicopter control was all procedural control. So you basically, hey, I'm checking at point blue. Now I'm checking at point purple. And that's how they kept track of you. And then when you don't check in, they're like, oh, we should probably look for those helicopter guys. And so it was very dynamic, and we're on the grounds. And my crew chief happens to be a quality assurance staff sergeant. He goes, hey, let me take a look at this engine. And he does a visual inspection. Of course, it's just the outside. It's a visual inspection. He's like, you know what? I don't see any damage. Maybe if we do a engine wash right here in the desert, maybe we can kind of blow it out and see if it works again. And we're like, yeah, let's do that. So we took all our drinking water and we poured it into the engine wash, and like all of our drinking water. You pour that in, and we ran this thing for 15 minutes. The engine was fine. And I'm like, well, you can only imagine what happened the afternoon we got from maintenance later on. But the engine was running, and we're no longer like stranded in the desert. By the time that all happens, the other helicopter had dropped off the wounded at the combat surgical hospital. It came back to meet up with us maybe half an hour later, and we're ready to go. Like, all right, let's get out of here. Actually, we had more walking wounded on our helicopter, so let's go back to the combat surgical hospital and let's go back, and then we'll figure it out, right? So we're transiting along, and we're like 50 feet, 50 knots, just because you can only see the road, Highway 1. You're kind of following the road and all the vehicles on, and that's all you can really see. It's just zero horizon. And we're trucking along, and we get to the combat surgical hospital, and we're like, okay, let's drop them off, and let's try and get back to headquarters, and then we'll call a squad, right? Because we're like, I don't want to get standard here, because the combat surgical hospitals were constantly moving. They're like bump, 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 bump. So we dropped our walking wounded, get back in the air. Now we're heading back north, and we're south of Nazareth at this point, and we do a procedural check-in. And DASC, I think was called, can't remember what it stood for, goes, hey, I can't remember our call sign, but hey, Kazbek 1-2, would you be able to pick up 12 urgent surgicals? So there's different categories of how bad, how quickly we need to get them to the hospital to save their lives. And urgent surgical was like, it's as fast as you need. These guys are dying. And like, oh man. And we're like, well, is there anybody else available? Like, no, you're the only helicopters in Iraq flying right now. We're like, okay, well, that narrows it down. That's us then, I guess. We talk about it, but we already knew that we had a potentially bad engine, and we already had emergency landing in the desert. We already knew that we should probably get to maintenance somehow, but you're not going to turn down a medevac like that. So we all talked about it as a crew, and we said, yeah, let's do this.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Hangar Z Podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories that promote the personnel and equipment behind the missions in public safety aviation. Lastly, stand by for a message after a word from our sponsors. Cheers.
Thank you to our sponsor, Robinson Helicopter Company, the choice for unrivaled safety and reliability, so you can accomplish any mission with confidence. For more than half a century, Robinson has been at the forefront of the helicopter industry. From the R-22 to the R-66 turbine, Robinson makes helicopters accessible so more people can accomplish more missions. Climb higher. For additional information, visit www.robinsonheli.com. Thanks to our sponsor, Summit Aviation, a full-service provider for business, government, parapublic, and military aviation, specializing in maintenance, modifications, avionics, interiors, and paint. Discover more at summit-aviation.com.
When every second counts, trust Night Flight Concepts to keep you mission ready. With advanced night vision technology, FAA-certified repair services, and expert training, we've got your six. Visit nightflightconcepts.com to learn more.
We hope you enjoyed this episode with Tony Lumpy Lumpkin. His diverse flying career, from combat missions with the Marine Corps to high-risk rescues with the Coast Guard, demonstrates a deep commitment to aviation safety and a sound risk management. The flying experiences Tony and Bryan shared from Antarctica were especially captivating and serve as a powerful reminder of the challenges aviators can face in extreme environments. As I mentioned during the episode, being a true aviator means knowing when to say no to a mission. That kind of judgment can save lives. Thanks for tuning in. Stay safe out there, and we'll catch you the next time on the Hangar Z Podcast.